legendary nights may be coming in November as one of the most unexpected, but potentially historically significant fights that we've seen in a while may be getting made. And it's going to shock you who I say the opponents in this fight are, or the contestants are. Jaron Ennis and Brian Norman Jr. As word on the street is that they're very close to finalizing a fight for November. When I look at this fight, it reminds me of another one that I saw when I was much younger and had much more hair on the top of my head and much less gray on my chin that I saw. And at the time, I was like, wow, what a great fight. But then over time, you look back and you realize, wow, that was a lot better fight than I really knew it was when I saw it. And that fight is Roy Jones Jr. versus Bernard the Executioner Hopkins. Let's talk about this fight that could be getting made, what people have to say about it, and what my take is. And I'm telling you, it's good. Let's do that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. History buffs will remember these fights. Bernard Hopkins versus Roy Jones Jr. happened early in the career of Bernard Hopkins and early in the career of Roy Jones Jr. Neither one of them were established stars at the time. Roy Jones Jr. was on his way up. Obviously, he had the Olympic silver medal. Got robbed in the Olympics, but was fantastic professional, one of the best athletes, best fighters that people have seen, at least since Sugar Ray Leonard, maybe longer than that. And people knew it. Who does that sound like to you? Sounds a little bit like Jaron Ennis, doesn't it? Then you had another fighter, Bernard Hopkins, who was fighting. Bernard Hopkins, somebody that had a good reputation of being a tough, up-and-coming fighter, young fighter, started older because he had served time in the penitentiary. But people thought very highly of him. Did they think or know that he was going to be Bernard Hopkins, the longest reigning middleweight champion ever, a dude that could fight for championships all the way up to 50 years old and have the amazing career that he had? No. But they knew he was a good fighter, and they matched Roy Jones Jr. in with him that early, well before Bernard Hopkins had a championship. And I do believe this was actually this was before Roy Jones Jr. had a championship, because the fight wasn't for a championship. However, so now you have Roy Jones and Brian Norman, but both of these guys actually have championships. Also tells you something about the times, right? Tells you something about the times that Brian with this 4-belt era. I do believe the 3-belt era was in, actually it might have still. Anyway, Bernard Hopkins is a heck of a fighter to put in there with Roy Jones Jr. And it was a very good fight. Roy Jones Jr. winds up winning the fight. He said he won the fight with one hand. Sounds very familiar. Fighters saying that all the time when a fight is a little closer than people thought it was going to be. But we saw what Bernard Hopkins came to be. So with this fight with Brian Norman, hey man, that might very well be what we're looking at. So when I had a live stream yesterday, and you're always welcome to join the live stream in the mornings that we do. Several callers had things to say about how Brian Norman was not ready, how Brian Norman was going to get rolled over and it wasn't going to be a competitive fight and he shouldn't do it. He should wait. Shout out to 2 Cent. I think 2 Cent Boxing probably was the woman who had the most articulate point of view. And that was generally her feeling. So I very much respect it. And it very well may be true that it's too early. Very well may be true that it's too early. But as we look back on it years from now, we might say, hey, man, Brian Norman was a little early for him, but he came back. He won a championship in 147. He reigned for a long time. He moved up to 154. He did his thing at 154. Jaron went all the way up to 175, and you can see how those guys' careers pan out after one of the two of those guys lose against each other. So, yeah, I'm excited about that fight. When I first heard about it, I was like, man, I don't really know what this is. It seems really soon because I wasn't as up to date on Brian Norman as I should be. I've seen Brian Norman fight a few times. I've seen, several interviews of Brian Norman and his father, Brian Norman Sr. So I know exactly who they are. I know that they're quality fighters. I've heard the sparring rumors about him and Gervonta Davis. I've heard about the work that he was, that he had given Terrence Crawford and all of the kind of, gym sparring war conversation that has been very popular to talk about over the last several years. Saw it with Errol Spence Jr., saw it ad nauseum with Devin Haney. You've heard all of this. Brian Norman is somebody that, those stories were out on. So I'm very familiar with who he is. But at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to it. There's another aspect of this fight that I like a lot. The fact that it's an domestic American fight, a domestic American fight. By that, I mean, it is two local Americans. You have a Philly fighter and you have a rare unicorn in boxing, a fighter from Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia is not a big boxing city. However, hey, they got one right there. You can have that fight, to tell you the truth. You could have that fight in Philadelphia, but you could also have that fight in Atlanta. Ticket sales, and I'm sure ticket sales in Philly are going to be really good. The ticket sales in Atlanta, if you publicize that right and have the right matchup going on along with it, can be absolutely huge. You may mess around and get a $5 million gate with Boots and Brian Norman up out of Atlanta. That's probably a little exaggeration, but you get my point, because there's going to be all kind of stars and all kind of black celebrities there to see Jaron in his fight and to see the local boy, Brian Norman Jr. fight. So there's just a lot of things about that fight I think are really good. Not the least of which is the fight itself, because, man, Jaron can fight. And Brian Norman is going to come bring the fight to him. So if Brian Norman can stand the heat and if he can connect and he's a better fighter than people think he is, hey, man, you may see, like I said, a classic fight like we got out of Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins back in the 90s. But anyway, that's my take. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. Sorry for the technical error in the middle of the live stream, of the video. And with that, I'm out. Peace.